Hey, Marcus Housewith here, welcome to episode 15 of our quick progression series. Today we're continuing where we left off from our previous episode. We're at Eve and we've just separated our orbiter and our lander and we're just warping around now. We've got control of our lander of course and we're just going to hit that abort button and fold back our solar panels. Of course, so we don't lose them on re-entry. I'm going to hold retrograde. We don't want this little puppy to burn up. This is our first Eve lander. Just going to run an atmospheric analysis now that we've first come into Eve. We'll hold on to that though, we're not going to transmit it straight away. We'll grab temperature readings, grab our pressure data readings as well of course, and we're going to keep all this. We don't have the power to send it back now, but we can certainly send it back after landing. Obviously the atmosphere at Eve is extremely thick, especially compared to Kerbal, and massively thick compared to somewhere like Duna. In fact, with the exception of Jul, Eve has got the highest gravity as well, so it's a very dense planet with a lot of atmosphere, and it has a beautiful sunset, filled with greens and purples, just going on behind us right now. What makes those beautiful colours? I'm not sure, I need to research it. Leave us a comment and tell us why the atmosphere is this colour. There's probably many of you out there that are much smarter than I with such things, so I'd love to know myself. So we're descending very quickly, burning off a lot of that energy, and we're about 14,000 metres in altitude at the moment. There's definitely no issue wiping off the speed when we hit the atmosphere of Eve. The atmosphere's got 5 times the sea level pressure of Kerbal. In fact, the atmospheric pressure of Eve at 10,500 metres roughly is about the same as the atmospheric pressure as Kerbal at ground level. So we're just killing off that heat shield, we're going to jettison this. In fact, you can now see that we're descending so very slowly that it's going to take us a very long time to get down here, so we're actually going to skip this part of the video and we'll come back after this descent is largely completed. This part does take a very long time. So we're just bypassing now, just until we get closer to our landing, so you're not sitting through all that. And touchdown for the first time on Eve. A very exciting time for all Kerbals. Of course, they won't even know that it's happened until the radio signals reach Kerbal, which need to travel at the speed of light. We've popped out those solar panels already, and we're just reviewing this data, and we're just going to start transmitting this information back now. This, of course, being the data that we've picked up from the upper atmosphere as we were entering in. So we'll just review all these now, and we'll transmit all of those back. Off goes the temperature scan. Of course, we have to transfer them all back before we can pick up our new scientific results from the surface of Eve, just because we can't grab more than one at a time, so we've got to transfer them back first. Of course, we're in the dark, so we're not going to be able to send too much back, otherwise our batteries are going to run out. We need solar power, so we're time warping into daylight now. So we have that beautiful green and purple sunrise coming up for the first time ever witnessed from Eve's surface. Well, maybe not, actually, because we don't have a camera on board this thing. I've always wondered why it is that they haven't given you a camera to actually research from the R&D centre. Just accumulating some good solar energy here now so that we can actually start sending some new results back to Kerbal. Of course, what all the Kerbals would actually like to see is some photographs or some video footage. Not on this mission though, we're just sending some temperature scans. We'll just review and send back that atmospheric scan from the high atmosphere of Eve. And remember as well, if you're running low on battery, you need to check that allow partial option on your antenna to make sure that it will slowly over time send all the information back. In this case, we might actually have enough power. Let's see. And yes, it looks like we are going to have enough. Excellent. So as you can see there, we're having a little bit of a wobble around there as you go into time acceleration. That's normal. We'll just grab an atmospheric scan now from the surface of Eve, and we're going to start shooting that one back as well. Because the gravity of Eve is so high, you do get this little weird gravity issue when you're time accelerating. It just sort of pushes the vessel into the ground harder than it should. It's a little strange. So I'm just grabbing a temperature scan from the surface. Eve's Midlands were on here. Grab that pressure data, send that back as well. Grab that very precious gravity data. We need to know a lot about that gravity of Eve. So we've queued those up. We'll just wait for them to finish. We don't want to run out of electric charge. We'll just be patient. And I don't want to time warp too much just in case my craft just breaks apart. And just because we packed one, we're going to grab our mystery goo reading and send that back. Only a very little 21 science there. We'll just grab that seismic data as well, send that one back. Seismic data in particular can be quite large in the amount of data it's got to send back, so it's quite hard on the battery. You want to watch that again, look at that allow partial option if you need. So we're just going to check around all the science instruments now, make sure that we've accumulated all of the data. And you'll see there's just a few points sitting there still. Sometimes you just end up with a few random points sitting there after the fact, and we have there with the gravity as well, so we're just going to quickly transfer that back as well. And I haven't really managed the power very well there. I've run out of power. That's frustrating. Of course, just time accelerate to get your power back up before trying to go again. And you can see there we've also got a little bit of atmospheric analysis there left as well. So remember as well, if you ever get a mission that requires you to pick up some science from the surface of Eve, you can just come back and pick up this vessel and transmit a temperature scan or anything like that. So we're just doing a quick check here, make sure we've picked everything up. I'm pretty sure we've got it all now, that's about it. We've done about all we can do here with this lander for the moment, so we'll move on to the next part of the mission. We're going to switch back to our other vessel, which is now heading towards Gilly. So as you can see there, we're still on a very high elliptical orbit around Eve, and we're going to be heading out towards Gilly. Now, Gilly is actually quite difficult to get an encounter with, and that's because it's such a very, very small body. It's actually the smallest gravitational body in the whole game. So we're just going to start by adding a manoeuvre here, and we're going to try to get this as close as possible. Your encounter needs to be pretty much perfect for this to work out. Now, the first thing I'm doing here is I'm raising our periapsis to actually meet that descending node. The reason for this, of course, is because we want our speed to be as low as possible when making our inclination change. So to get our periapsis up to this mark isn't a huge amount of delta V, just 178 meters per second. So just turning around slowly there to our maneuver node marker, getting ready to do that burn. And after we complete this burn and we actually warp out to the descending node, we can do a inclination change very effectively. You can just hit the track there and select the warp to next maneuver button, and that's just a nice shorthand way of jumping straight to that maneuver. One thing I've noticed about the auto time warp functions there is that they do sometimes warp you in a little bit slow. Sometimes it's easier just to do it manually. So you recall back in previous episodes when we were talking about the best places to do burns for certain maneuvers. In this particular case, we want to raise that periapsis right up. So what we're wanting to do is burn right on that apoapsis marker. That is the best place, the most efficient place to raise that periapsis. So we'll kick off now. We're just going to start this burn here, and we'll just watch this slowly tick down as we burn a lot of the fuel remaining in this atomic motor engine. So we're at about 100 meters per second to go there, just waiting to finalise this. And there we go, burn complete there. So you might recall from our previous episode, we picked up all of our science readings from space near Eve. And we didn't actually transmit those back at the time because we needed to switch back to our other vessel to get that into a polar orbit. Now that we've got a little spare time up our sleeves, we can review the data we've got here and we can transmit all that back so that we can pick up some new science data when that becomes available to us around Gilly. Again, just keeping a bit of an eye on that electric charge, making sure that we've got enough to send back our science experiments in full. That's looking pretty good there now, and I think what we'll do now is just get our vessel into that descending node area. So we're going to time warp into the descending node marker. That's where we're going to do our inclination change. Based on the orbit we've got here, it would be technically a little more efficient to do this inclination change on our ascending node, which is a bit further out from Eve. The reason we're not going to do that is because then it's going to take us another full orbit to catch up with Gilly, and we want to move this episode along. And seeing as we don't need all of the delta V that we've got available to us in this tank at the moment, there's no reason why we shouldn't just make this burn at the descending node. So once you're as close to that descending node line as you can get, then we're safe to do our burn. Obviously this burn's going to be a normal burn because we're at our descending node, remembering of course if we were at the ascending node it would be an anti-normal burn. So we're just reducing that inclination difference there now. That's 7 degrees, 6 degrees, 5, 4, 3, 2... Just as you get very close there, you just want to back that thrust right off. You want to just adjust it very slowly. And there we go there, getting that very close now. 0.1 degrees. And spot on there, 0.0. You want to get spot on for Gilly. So we'll just time warp down a little closer to our periapsis marker there, and we're just going to adjust ourselves so that we get an encounter. Because our apoapsis was so high compared to Gilly's, we just need to burn retrograde until we see that encounter come in perfectly. So there we go, there, perfect. We've got our manoeuvre node set, and it's around about a 66 meter per second burn that we're going to need to do there. Once you get it down close like this, it's probably just easier to kill off the manoeuvre node there, and we'll just do it manually from here until we get the encounter. There we go. So yes, Gilly's got the least gravity of any body, as I said before. It's only got 0.5% of Kerbal surface gravity, so it's barely anything at all. So now that we've got our encounter, we're going to head back to our space center and do the usual thing. We're just going to hop back to our mission on Minmus, and we're going to transfer back all that wonderful science. So yes, here is another 470 odd science there. We got back just before it had filled up, so that was pretty much perfect timing. So keep in mind, this is the same biome that we landed on. We still haven't transmitted all this science back. So we're heading back to our tracking station now, obviously, and then back to our Gilly mission. So yeah, the gravity on Gilly is very, very small, only 0.5% of Kerbal, so that makes it very, very difficult to actually land on. It even makes it difficult to walk on. In fact, if a Kerbal jumps on Gilly, they will jump over 1,000 meters. So we're just warping into Gilly here now. We're quite close already, so that's fine. As you can see there as well, Gilly spins quite quickly, and it's a very odd looking shape. It's all lumpy, and that's because gravity can't pull it into a proper sphere. It's really just a big rock with only 3 biomes: lowlands, midlands and highlands. We'll just log temperature high over Gilly. Do the rest of our experiments as well, of course. We'll log gravity data above Gilly's midlands. And our pressure data as well, of course. Now remember as well, you can pick up gravity data over the top of every biome, so you can wait until you actually come up over the top of the midlands and the highlands and the lowlands and grab all sets of gravity data for those biomes. Again, we're just picking up any of those little extra couple of percentage points of science that can sometimes linger around. The next thing we've got to do, of course, is get ourselves into an orbit of Gilly, so we'll time warp ourselves into the periapsis marker, and then of course we're going to do a retrograde burn just to pull ourselves into an orbit. Considering, however, how little gravity Gilly has, we actually need to burn off the vast majority of the velocity that we've got here to actually get into an orbit. In fact, the orbital velocity of Gilly at about this particular distance is only around 10 meters per second, which is just tiny. It's just such a tiny little moon. So here we go, we're knocking off pretty much all of our orbital velocity here to get ourselves into a Gilly orbit. Luckily, the atomic motor's still got plenty of delta V in it. We've got such a light little vessel here that we really don't have to push anything. The thrust-to-weight ratio on this stage now is actually very, very high. So as we reduce that velocity, we can sort of see just how difficult it is to come and do a landing on Gilly. Although we don't need hardly any delta V to actually do a landing, actually sticking to the surface is quite difficult. This is also made worse as well because most of the surface of Gilly is covered with really steep slopes. Normally, of course, to actually land on Gilly, what we'd be doing is reducing our periapsis, and we'd be reducing our orbital velocity as we descended onto the surface, but because the gravity is so low, we don't even have to do that. In fact, if we did do that, it would take us half an hour just to get down there. So we're just warping around to the light side of Gilly now, and at the same time having a look at the surface of Gilly as we're warping around. You can see how lumpy it is and how difficult it is to land on these slopes. Of course, that is going to be made much easier if we can actually see what we're doing. If we were doing this on the dark side of Gilly, it would be much more difficult. So we're just going to do something that you wouldn't have seen me do before. We're basically going to take off this remaining bit of orbital velocity, this 10 meters per second that we were going to take off, basically so that we've got a straight fall back into Gilly's surface. But as I said, that fall would actually take us a very long time to actually get to Gilly surface, so we're going to do something a little bit different again. We're going to point straight at the surface and we're going to thrust straight towards the surface so that we can actually get there a lot quicker. So just adding around 50 meters per second of velocity to actually make this faster. So now's a good time to disconnect this stage. We're going to let our atomic motor stage fall into Gilly surface at 50 meters per second. We don't need this anymore, we've used up the vast majority of our fuel now. So just turning retrograde and we're going to decouple this stage here now. Just making sure that we've got the right stage hooked up there ready to ditch this. And decoupling there. So goodbye to our atomic stage of our rocket, which is now doomed to hit Gilly at over 50 meters per second. We, on the other hand, are going to thrust forwards when the time's right, and of course we won't impact on Gilly's surface. As we're coming in over Gilly's surface here, we're going to attempt to do another gravity scan, and yes, we've got another reading from the highlands, so we'll transmit that back. Because of the gravity on Gilly, we're still not classed as actually being in space near Gilly yet, so we need to come in quite a bit further before we can pick up the rest of our space near Gilly experiments. Time warping in, we're just passing around 15,000 meters high now. You can see even after time warping right in just how little velocity we're picking up. We're only doing a bit over 50 meters per second still, and we've been time warping for quite some time. If you're ever out around Gilly with Kerbals on board, it's actually great just to detach them and land them themselves. The jetpack has got more than enough delta V to get down to Gilly and back up again just because of the low gravity, so that's a great thing to try. The problem, of course, with landing a Kerbal is you've got very little control. In fact, you used to have much less control. At least with Kerbals now, you do still have a nav ball, I believe, whereas in previous versions of the game, you didn't. You just had to eyeball it the whole time. You can see there I've been trying to grab science from space near Gilly, and we're still not close enough. This is how close you have to be. So there we go. Now we're in space near Gilly, so we can start transmitting these science experiments back now. So off go all of those experiments on the way back to Kerbal. So we're just waiting until the majority of our altitude has been dropped off, and then we'll do a final retrograde burn to do our landing, of course. The two little thrusters that we've got on the side of this thing, the two Twitch engines, are very, very efficient little engines. Because of how small and light this little satellite probe is, we've got loads of thruster weight on these engines. Just getting close now, and we've still got a bit of horizontal velocity going on. Oh, we're still in orbit mode. We're going to switch over to surface mode there, and we're just going to slowly figure out which way we need to knock off the speed. Oh, this is a pretty dodgy sort of landing. Oh dear. Okay, we need to straighten this up. Come on. Just a very, very, very small retrograde burn here just to take that last little bit of horizontal velocity off. And you can see we're just floating here, we're not even dropping, so we're going to point ourselves again straight to the ground, and we're just going to do a slight burn here just to take these last couple of meters off. And then of course quickly we'll turn around so that we can land. Oh dear, let's see if this works. Come on, come on, come on. Come on. And touchdown, I think. We're just kind of hovering around here on the surface. I don't know if we're actually touching it, are we? We did hit it for about a second, and now we're just kind of wobbling and floating around just above the surface. It's okay though, because we are actually seeing some experiments return back on the surface, so that's what we want to see. We're going to transmit all of these science experiments back to Kerbal while we're still touching the ground at least. You can see why it would be that if a Kerbal jumped, they would basically just skyrocket up into the air. So we're just going to do the usual thing now. We're just going to make sure all of that science has been transmitted back and pick up any of those little remaining bits of science that need to be transmitted back. So you can see there, with the amount of fuel we've got on this thing and the very low gravity of Gilly, we could pretty much bounce all over this planet 50 times probably before we ran out of fuel here. Just to demonstrate that, actually, what we're going to do is just rocket ourselves over to a new biome. We can do that very quickly. In fact, we'll actually time accelerate this process so you don't have to sit through it all. Now, well, our orbit just looks ridiculous there because just a few meters per second just sends us way out. So what we need to do basically is keep thrusting towards the ground. And we'll just fire that way, which is going to give us a pretty strange looking orbit, but that doesn't matter. We've pretty much just got to do this by line of sight, really. Again, we pretty much just need to keep pointing down towards the ground and thrusting downwards to keep ourselves, at least at a reasonable altitude. So we're just going to time accelerate into the landing here. And we'll just take out the majority of that velocity that we've got going on here at the moment. And that's about 10 meters per second there now. Just got to head back down towards the ground again. And we'll just flip ourselves back over. And touchdown for the second time on Gilly. So there's our second biome, and we're basically struggling to stick on the ground here again. So we'll just start by grabbing that pressure data scan on the highlands of Gilly, and we'll pick up, of course, the rest of our science experiments as well. So we're just going through the same exercise again of picking up all the science, making sure that we've transmitted back all those little fractional remaining pieces that are still sitting there in our science experiments. And there we go, that's the mission complete for Gilly there as well. Again, you can jump around to other biomes. There's only the 3 biomes on here, remember, so there's not a huge amount of science to pick up. So we're just going to switch over now to our polar orbiter vessel, and we're going to just finalise the episode with a few final experiments from the polar orbiter craft. The first thing we're going to do here is we're going to deploy our survey scanner. We're going to do something we haven't tried doing yet. We're actually going to perform an orbital survey. Now, to do this, you must be in a polar orbit, and you must be in a reasonably low orbit as well. Usually you need to be between 100 kilometers and a couple of thousand kilometers from the surface to do this. The survey scans actually automatically transmit themselves back. You don't have to do that manually, and you can see after we've done that the planet lights up with a heap of coloured bands. Just like so, there. And this is actually an orbital survey of the amount of ore that's present on the surface of Eve. And I do plan to do an ore collection mission very soon in the series, and that's going to show you how to build a craft that's actually going to be able to pick up ore and convert it to rocket fuel. What these coloured lines show you basically is the brighter the line is, the more ore is present at that location on the surface. So when you were picking an area to do some mining, the brightest areas are the best place to be. Again, keep in mind that whenever you have got a mission appear in mission control for science from space around Eve, you can jump back here to the orbiter and just transmit a little bit of science back and achieve that mission straight away. As well, what we're doing here now is picking up any gravity scans that we can find over each of the biomes that we're going to orbit over. Now, you could do multiple orbits and actually pick up different biomes that you haven't passed over yet, that's fine. Because we're in a polar orbit, of course, the entire planet is going to eventually pass underneath this vessel, and if you're patient enough, you can pick up every single biome, every single gravity scan from every single biome that's available. So you'll see here we're just passing over the poles of Eve, the poles biome, and we should have another gravity scan, which we do, so we can transmit that back as well. Again, when you transmit that gravity scan back, there's always a point or two sitting there remaining for you to have to send back a second time. I'm not really sure why that is the case. I don't know if that's by design or whether it's a little glitch. It seems to have always been there, so I'm assuming that's by design. Another gravity scan to pick up here, so we'll grab that one as well. And as we transmit all this back, we've basically orbited now to the opposite side of the planet. Over a new biome here again, I think. Let's try this one. Yes, we are above Eve's highlands this time, so we'll transfer that back as well. So there's a lot more biomes on Eve you can do this with. You can be much more patient than I'm being right now, and you can pick them all up. For those completionists out there, polar orbits are the best way to pick up all of this data, as you can just jump in one polar orbit and keep on orbiting around until you've accumulated all of the science. So we'll head back to the Space Center now. So you can see there we've got accumulated over 3 million in funds now, and we've got over 4,000 science points to use there. And we've unlocked a bunch of missions and milestones and all sorts of things, similar to what we did in previous episodes. So we'll just bring these up for a quick summary here. We've explored Gilly, there's 522,000 there. We've transmitted and recovered scientific data from the surface of Gilly. We've landed on Gilly as well. We've achieved orbit around Gilly, and we've transmitted and recovered scientific data from space around Gilly. we have explored, we have landed, and we have achieved orbit from Eve, as well as transmitting and recovering scientific data from space around Eve as well. Our milestones as well, of course, we've got the first flyby, we've got the scientific data, orbit, suborbital flight, and atmospheric flight, all of Eve. Oh, and we landed on Eve and escaped the gravitational influence as well. Of course, we did our first flyby, we grabbed our scientific data, and we entered orbit of Gilly. And of course, we entered suborbital space flight and landed on the surface of Gilly as well. Twice, actually. And finally, we got the flyby Eve for 198,000 there. So again, we've achieved a huge amount in the last few episodes. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you have any questions for me, please do whack them in the comments below. Thanks very much to all of you that have subscribed. For those that haven't, please do subscribe and support the channel. Follow me on Twitter at MarcusHouseGame, and we'll see you in the next video. Now, this being our first mission to Eve makes you think about maybe what it would have been like to send some of the earlier probes to Venus. The first Soviet attempt at a flyby to Venus was launched back in 1961, but it failed to leave Earth's orbit. In fact, the next two attempts, which